Hello again. Would like to continue our presentations of some of the important figures in the early modern philosophy. So the last presentation we did was René Descartes, and this one's going to be on Immanuel Kant. Kant is probably the most important philosopher to appear after Descartes, and is really one of the truly significant philosophers in the history of philosophy. So let's take a, and just to comment that this is still in the Enlightenment, what we would call the Enlightenment period, and Kant dies in 1804, so he brings us just to the cusp of the 19th century. Kant had a wide range of interest and wrote extensively on most of them. If we just take, for example, he's a major figure in the study of ethics, even still today. But our primary focus on his philosophy in this context is primarily in the field of epistemology and metaphysics. Basically, it seems in these fields his primary interest was to resolve the dispute that we mentioned earlier in our Descartes presentation, finishing up, the dispute between the Continental Rationalist and the British Empiricist, which kind of dominated the intellectual scene during the early modern period after the time of Descartes, even including Descartes. And if you recall, that dispute involved the rationalist, Continental Rationalist on the one hand, the British Empiricist on the other. And the rationalist made claims that we can know things about reality beyond what we're actually capable of experiencing. According to the rationalists, we're equipped with faculties that enable us to know things beyond what's experienceable for us. And that meant for them that you could know things about non-material entities like God or even the human soul, that you might be able to have some kind of knowledge about those, or freedom, things that you might say exist in a kind of spiritual or immaterial realm. Nonetheless, the rationalists thought that we can talk about those things and know things about them. The British empiricists resisted that and sort of denied that that was a possibility for us, that our knowledge was really limited to things that were derived from human experiences and so forth. They denied the existence of anything like innate ideas that seemed to be was the basis for the rationalist position, that we're born understanding certain things. Empiricists denied that we have anything like innate ideas and argued that everything that we know ultimately is derived from experiences that we have. Theoretically, that dispute might have gone on for a long time, and if you're just talking about ideas that don't have any consequences, it's not so significant. But Kant, as I said before, was a major contributor in the field of ethics and morality, and cared very much about that side of things. Saw that there were two dangers to the status of morality as a result of this dispute between the rationalist and the empiricist. The first danger he saw was related to the rationalist, and he feared that their arguments made it, promoted dogmatism, or the idea that you could adopt a position and as though it were true, but that there was no way to verify it in actual human experiences. So you could just adopt a position and maintain it no matter what. So that would be, from a moral point of view, a kind of problematic position. The second danger Kant associated with the British empiricists, with the empiricism in general, that was that the empiricists, as they developed their ideas and their arguments against the rationalists, their positions became increasingly skeptical. So skepticism, if it goes too far, is also a problem in the area of morality. It's not the case of just believing something without question. The skeptics sort of would start to think that it wasn't possible to know the truth about anything. And that seemed to be just as damaging to morality as adopting a point of view that you couldn't actually prove. Kant, when he referred to his earlier career in philosophy, that he too had been a rationalist philosopher, and that he seemed content doing that kind of philosophy. And it wasn't until he read the philosophy of David Hume, as he put it, he was awakened from his dogmatic slumbers. The shock of this encounter with Hume sort of raised questions for him about the legitimate use of philosophy to acquire knowledge, that he undertook a critical examination of all of our faculties with respect to knowledge. And he wanted to try to determine once and for all, how do we know what we know, and what are the limits of our knowledge? This began what is known as Kant's critical philosophy, and it involved him writing three major critiques. These are, and I say major critiques, but because each of them could be studied in their own right, and is still so today. The first is perhaps the most important. The critique of pure reason is an examination of the theoretical use of our reason, what we can know theoretically and what are the limits of that. The second is the critique of our practical use of reason, and that is primarily aimed at discussed ethical consideration. A kind of critique of our ability to use reason in the field of morality or ethics. The third critique is the critique of judgment, was focused more on questions of aesthetics. The points that we're going to make in the remainder of this presentation come, for the most part, from the critique of pure reason. That's a daunting philosophical tome. I mean, it's easily 800 pages of very dense philosophical exposition, and a challenge to read it, but nonetheless, it's probably of the three critiques, it's the one that is probably most studied still. In the points that we want to make, we've tried to narrow them down to three different topics, or which kind of represent three different ways in which Kant tried to accomplish the goal that he had, and that goal was to resolve the troubling dispute between the rationalist and the empiricist. The first idea that we want to take a look at is Kant's theory of perception. In parentheses, I referred to that as a sandwich theory of perception. I saw that way of describing it at one point, and it's kind of stuck with me. I'm not sure it's in our textbook, but nonetheless, I think it's helpful. So we'll look at that. The second idea that we're going to look at is an analogy with Copernicus, that Kant compares himself and what he's doing in philosophy to what Copernicus did in the field of astronomy. So we'll look at that secondly. Thirdly, we're going to look at the distinction that Kant introduces between phenomenal reality and noumenal reality. In some sense, these are three different ways of looking at things, but in another sense, they're all about the same insight that it seemed like Kant was trying to communicate to us. So a lot of times, you could say that a philosopher has a central insight that sort of pervades his or her work, and you have to use different ways of approaching that insight or expressing it. And I think that's what these three are. So it's kind of, if you come to understand the content of these, one helps you understand the other. So they're all interrelated in that respect. As I just said, Kant's theory of perception can be described as a kind of a sandwich theory. Kant argues that our perception or our experience of reality is the result of two things joining together. And the end result is of these two things coming together. The end result is our perception or our experience. This is maybe a little premature to say this, the second statement here, but basically he's arguing that our consciousness imposes a form on reality that enables us to experience it, or that in the process of experience things, our consciousness adds something to the experience, adds something to what it is that we actually end up experiencing. And for Kant, that's basically the form. What we add is the form of our perception or experience. And for him, it includes some really fundamental things like space, time, and causality. But let's look at it more specifically, then we can try to elaborate a little bit. Okay, we want to look at Kant's theory of perception. We've used the image of a sandwich in order to talk about it. So we say if you build a sandwich, you bring two pieces of bread together with something in the middle that you like. In this case, we're going to say that what's in the middle of these two pieces of bread is our perception of reality, or our experience of reality. So according to Kant, there's two things have to come together that result in what our perception is, or what our experience is. On the first hand, there's sensations that provide the content of what our experience is. We can say the sensations originate outside of ourselves, and with respect to them, we're just passive, or we just receive sensations. You can say sensations come to us through the different ways in which we're sensitive. You can say we're sensitive beings, and we exist in a world, and one of the ways in which we get information about the world in which we exist is through the ways in which we contact that world. You can say our five senses provide that kind of information for us. We get our eyes are light sensitive, our ears are sensitive to fluctuations in sound waves and so forth, and touch is more direct and immediate. Taste and smell all give us information about the world which is external to ourselves, and that provides the basic content of what's in our experience. And we don't have to do anything necessarily. We just open our eyes, or we're just there and sensations come. Kant wants to argue that there's another element necessary for what we end up experiencing. He wants to say that these sensations kind of have to be organized. This plethora of information which is bombarding us continually. I mean, in order for us to have an experience of it, it has to be informed, it has to be organized in some way. And that the organization comes from our own consciousness. He's going to say it's certain ideas of the mind provide the form that our experience takes. And that these ideas they come from inside ourselves, not from the world outside. We impose the form onto the sensations as we have them. And you could say in this regard, the mind is active. It's not just passively receiving all the information that we receive. So we have these two different elements that kind of have to combine and come together in order to account for what we actually experiencing. Some of these ideas are these that provide the form I mentioned in the previous slide. For Kant, they're very fundamental properties of reality as far as we know. Things like space and time, Kant is kind of saying that those are properties of the way in which we process information within our minds, and that somehow we can't have an experience of reality unless these ideas are part of it. They don't come from outside of ourselves as much as they come from the nature of our consciousness, our experience. Okay, the second idea we wanted to present was this analogy with Copernicus that Kant makes use of. So clearly Kant compares himself to Copernicus, and he argues that what Copernicus did in astronomy, that Kant does something very similar in philosophy. You could say what Copernicus did was revolutionary. I mean, he sort of turned upside down the ways that people perceived the solar system. And Kant was also doing something revolutionary in the field of philosophy. So we want to look at these different movements and see what's revolutionary about them, and also try to comment at least or identify what is the advantage of the new idea over the old idea. If we start with what Copernicus did, it's already kind of known to us. If you'll recall, we did a presentation on the three transitions into the modern period from the medieval world. And one was on scientific revolution, and we gave special attention to Copernicus and his kind of revolutionary shift in how you perceive the solar system. So Copernicus is operating in the field of astronomy, And the old theory, the one that was going to be undone by Copernicus, was a geocentric theory, which assumed that the Earth was at the center of everything. And that was a kind of viewpoint that had been worked out by Ptolemy. It was also, when we spoke about it before, a viewpoint that was endorsed by the church, the official position of the church, because it seemed to correspond with biblical teachings and so forth. But the new evidence that Copernicus had indicated that that wasn't the way things worked. So he proposed this new theory, which we call the heliocentric theory, which took the sun as being at the center and the Earth actually in orbit around the sun and not the other way around. So that was Copernicus's revolutionary shift, you might say. And even though it was resisted, I mean, there was evidence for it. You know, observations sort of could provide proof that what Copernicus said was closer to the truth than what the old theory had been about. You could say the advantage of this new theory, and it seems obvious, I mean, to us today, but what the new theory did that the old theory couldn't do was the new theory took into account the movement of the observer. Or that if you're trying to make sense out of the movement of the planetary bodies and so forth and the stars, that you couldn't get a very good reading on what was actually happening unless you took into account that you, the observer, were moving as you observed them. So the advantage of Copernicus' theory was it took the movement of the observer into account and provided a better understanding of what was actually happening in the heavens. Now Kant wanted to make use of that shift and to describe what he was doing in the field of philosophy. So in his case also there was an old theory and then a new theory and then also an advantage as well. From when Kant speaks about this, he said that the old theory or the traditional view about knowledge was that to know the truth about something in the world, the assumption was that our ideas have to correspond with what's actually out there. You say that's a kind of correspondence theory of truth, and it's not our place to get into that at the moment, but the basic correspondence theory of truth. If you want to say, do you know the truth about something, the question is, does your idea of it correspond with what's actually out there? Kant comments on this, that if that's what we're stuck with, a kind of correspondence theory of truth, then there's no way for us to avoid the problems of skepticism that the empiricists have been talking about. If you assume that in order to understand something, the ideas you have of it have to correspond with what's actually out there, there's no way to avoid skepticism. But Kant proposes a new way of understanding while knowledge is acquired, and what's our perception, our experience of reality. And he says, what if it's the other way around? What if it's not that our ideas have to correspond with what's out there? What if what's out there has to correspond with our ideas of it? And that's exactly what he wants to argue, and with his new theory of perception. So it's not like the old theory just assumes that we're passive receivers of reality. It's like we're looking through a window out there or something, and we're trying to understand something as though we could have a clear vision of it, and we're just kind of passive receivers. Kant's new theory says that's not quite the way it works. I mean, there is something which is out there, but our mind imposes a form on that material as we have experience of it, or why as we perceive it. So the advantage of his theory, it's just the opposite, kind of like Copernicus's was just the opposite, is that Kant's new suggestion takes into account what we ourselves had to experience as we have it. And the end result is that we get a better understanding of what experience is. We get a better understanding of how, to what extent, knowledge of reality is possible. Because it's not just what we receive, but it's also, we have to take into account what we ourselves contribute to what it is that we're taking in. So then the third way of talking about this is a distinction that Kant makes use of. I don't know that he's the first one to use these terms. I mean, they're Latin terms and derived from Greek, I believe, but he brings these terms, phenomena and noumena, into prominence, actually, by the way he uses them. So he draws this distinction between a kind of phenomena, or the phenomenal world, and the noumenal world. The phenomenal world is just reality as it appears to us, or it's reality as we experience it. So the way reality appears to us. Kant wants to say that with respect to this reality, knowledge is possible for us about this reality, because we can come to understand as he's been presenting it to us, because the mind provides the structure for the structure of this experience that we have of reality, and we can come to know what that structure is. We can come to know the forms that are necessary aspects of any possible experience that we can have of reality. And these forms are, because they're necessary aspects of reality insofar as we can have experiences of it, entitle us to have knowledge, and even certain knowledge of what it is that the nature of the reality that we're experiencing. In this respect, you can say that what Kant has done here is he's even legitimized scientific knowledge. I mean, which you could say it doesn't really need to be legitimized, but I mean, the skepticism of Hume, for instance, had even challenged the legitimacy of scientific knowledge, pointing out that it's based on certain assumptions about reality that you couldn't really have direct experiences of. But Kant's found a way to legitimize this kind of knowledge, because he's shown that there are certain forms that are necessary properties of every experience that we have as human beings, that there's space is involved in it, time is involved in it, and principles of causality are involved in it, and it's impossible for us to even think about having an experience in which these forms aren't part of it. So it's like these forms are necessary conditions for even the possibility of having an experience. So scientific knowledge is legitimized. The other realm that Kant distinguishes from the phenomena is noumena, or noumenal reality. This is reality as it is in itself. You'd say, what's the nature of reality independent of any human experience of it? And Kant is going to say that with respect to this reality, we can't have any knowledge. That knowledge of anything in this realm is really impossible. It's kind of like he's saying that there is a noumenal world, there is something out there that appears to us, But in the process of appearing to us, we alter it as we have an experience of it. And so we can't really know what it was before we've had an experience of it, and we can't know what it was before we've altered it in a way. It's kind of like saying that the human mind, you could say, for instance, if you have rose-colored glasses on, for instance, if you look through rose-colored glasses, everything looks rose-colored. It isn't really rose-colored, but if you look at it through rose-colored glasses, everything that you look at is changed by what it is that you're looking at it through. And Kant's argument is that reality is like that for us, that the nature of our consciousness is such that it alters what it is that we perceive in it. So, and that we can't know what that reality looks like independent of the ways in which we experience it. So we can know that there's a reality out there, something is out there that appears to us, but we can't know it as it is in itself. We can only know it insofar as we actually experience it, which means it's already been altered. So knowledge of this realm, in his point of view, is impossible. For him, this means really that metaphysical knowledge is really not possible. You can't know things the way they are in themselves. You can only know things insofar as human beings are capable of experiencing them. If you're going to talk about a reality which in principle it's impossible for a human being to experience, then you're talking about a realm in which we can't have any knowledge. So he's basically saying that what the rationalists did in this regard, when they claim to have knowledge about spiritual things like God or the soul or human freedom even, that they're talking about things as they are in themselves, and you can't have legitimate knowledge of those kinds of things. So hopefully this makes some sense to you, if you try to take into account the different ways we've tried to talk about this. On the next slide, I'm trying to look a little bit at the consequences of Kant's position. Just a couple of observations that of what the consequences of Kant's way of looking at things might be. I mean, for one thing that stands out for me is that if you accept Kant's analysis of our experience of reality, it's like saying that there's something that always remains unknown for us. I mean, we can know reality insofar as we experience it, but we can't know what reality is like independent of our experience of it. So there's always something that we can't get to, or you could say there's always something behind what we're experiencing that somehow we can't know what it is, because in the process of having an experience, we've sort of altered it so that we can have an experience of it, so that it fits in with our awareness or our consciousness of things. It's kind of like saying that there's a depth dimension. There's always something behind what we're seeing that we can't quite get to. You could say that's relates to both ourselves, like even trying to understand ourselves. We can only understand ourselves and what we are insofar as we have experiences of ourselves, and likewise sort of the external reality. We can understand what we're capable of having experiences of, but reality as it is in itself, independent of us and our experiences, we can't have that kind of knowledge. Nonetheless, there's something out there. So there's something a little humbling about Kant's position. You can't know everything, and that has to be taken into account. Nonetheless, there is this realm of the beyond. And you could say Kant referred to this realm of things like in the realm of the noumenal, or the realm of things as they are in themselves, as a kind of transcendental realm. Things exist kind of beyond our knowing. And we can't get into it, but this is sort of the beginning of transcendentalism, which is a movement that was inspired by Kant's philosophy. That would include the American transcendentalists, people like Coleridge and Henry David Thoreau, and others as well. So Kant inspired a lot of philosophers who followed him. In most cases, they wanted to give a different interpretation to things than Kant did. I mean, so the whole field of German idealism sort of starts with Kant, and then other thinkers taking up where they felt like Kant left off in a way. In general, there's this idea that there's this the idea of this depth dimension behind everything. I mean, it's kind of can be viewed as a world of subconscious realm, or of unconscious reality within a human being, kind of psychological dimension, deep, that we can't quite get to or understand, and so forth. So, I mean, in general, though, we'd have to say that one of the effects of Kant's thinking is that you come to think of the human mind a little differently. And in his analysis of things, you see that the human mind plays an active role in our perception of reality, that we're not just passive receivers of reality, and then we try and get that together, but the human mind plays an active role in what we're going to end up experiencing. And so there's a creative dimension to the human mind, an interpretive aspect of it, and also a kind of intuitive dimension as well. So all of these ideas are significant as we go forward, but we're going to have to, that's be enough for right now.